You know, the two areas that this is probably most important for you and for me is in the area of our relationships and our finances. That if you could just apply this principle, begin to pray this prayer, begin to look at your finances and your relationships through the lens of this principle, it could radically change, what's going on around you. In terms of relationships, and you don't forget this, you never evaluate a relationship based on where it is. You always evaluate a relationship based on where it's headed. All relationships move. They're getting better or worse. They're getting, stronger or weaker. They're getting more intimate or they're getting less intimate. Relationships move. You always evaluate a relationship based on where it's going. The prudent see danger, they take refuge. The simple keep going and they suffer for it. That's why if you're married and your husband or your wife is saying, honey, I really think we need to talk to somebody about our marriage. You know what they're doing? They're saying, you know what? We were at A, then we got to B and C. I think we're headed toward D. We need to do something. And you're saying, oh, but honey, we haven't had an argument in 2 days. She says, yeah, you've been out of town, okay? You're saying, oh, everything's fine today. Everything's fine. In fact, things are just a little itty-bitty worse than they were yesterday. And yesterday, they were just a little itty-bitty worse than they were the day before. And I mean, this is just such slow, incremental, change in our, are you sure? And your husband or your wife's going, yeah, but I see where we're going. We need to do something. The prudent see danger, and they do something. The simple just keep going, well, it's just going to work out. It's just somehow going to get better. It's just going to somehow get more intimate. It's just going to work out. Relationships are always moving. You never evaluate a relationship based on today. You evaluate it based on where it's moving. Hey, if you're married and slowly you find yourself spending more and more time with somebody who's not your husband or your wife, it's moving. You're foolish to respond to today. You're wise to respond to the linear direction of the relationship from where it started to where it is. You ignore that long enough, listen, you will wake up with very, very poor options. And you would give anything to be able to come back to today and do something different. Because that's what the prudent, the wise person does. Hey, if you're single and somebody who's married is spending more and more time at your cube or coming by your office, or it went from lunch, now they want to take you to dinner, it's moving. It's moving. You say, it'll just work out. No, listen, that's a path. It's a path. It's going somewhere because relationships are not idle. They're growing. They're moving. Same with finances. This is why, you know what, if I could have one wish for everybody in our churches financially, believe it or not, it wouldn't be that you give more money to the church. My one wish for you is that you would take this principle to heart, that the borrower is slave to the lender. The borrower is slave to the lender. And if you are a slave today because of consumer debt, you will be a bigger slave a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And you're generous in your heart, but you're not generous with your checkbook because you can't be, because you're a slave. And nobody started their career path thinking, I can't wait to have so much consumer debt that I'm a slave to people I don't even know, and I'm just a number on a computer. In fact, I'm several numbers on several computers in several organizations. I can't wait to live with almost no margin. I can't wait to live in a house I can't afford. I can't wait to lease cars I shouldn't lease. One day I'll be there. Nobody does that. Your dream is to be financially free. Your dream is to have margin. Your dream is to have savings. Your dream is to be able to retire early. You got a dream. But if you're on a path that's all about debt and leveraging debt for lifestyle, that goes somewhere. And the simple just keep going. Yeah, we probably ought to downsize. Yeah, we probably ought to not lease any. Yeah, we probably ought to sell that. Yeah, are you going to? No, because nobody else is. And surely we're not all wrong, are we? The prudent see danger, they do something. The simple, just keep going because it's just going to work out. I know. If you decide to get serious about this principle, there's 4 words I'd like for you to write down that these aren't steps, this is just the experiences along the way. The 4 things or 4 steps are not steps, the 4 kind of dynamics that go along with this principle. The first one is action. You have to do something. You have to do something. You have to end that relationship. You have to make a phone call. You have to get rid of your DSL. You have to move. You have to downsize. You have to sell something. You have to have a hard conversation. You have to end that relationship. You have to get a new job. I don't know what it is. The prudent see danger, and they don't pray, and they don't think about it. They don't contemplate. When they see danger, they take refuge. They do something. You're going to have to do something, not just feel bad about your situation and feel close to God because we had this religious experience together. The second word is sacrifice. This principle requires sacrifice. You have to give something up, and we are not good at that. That's why you have debt, because you're not good at giving stuff up. In fact, you have stuff you can't afford and shouldn't have purchased, because not only do we not sacrifice, we go the opposite way. We accumulate things we don't need. That's just the culture we live in. So the idea of sacrifice is it is so different, it's so uncomfortable. But if you apply this principle, you're going to have to sacrifice something relationally. You're going to have to sacrifice maybe your reputation. I'll tell you more about that in just a minute. You may have to sacrifice some money. You may have to sacrifice a lifestyle. You may have to sacrifice a friendship. You may have to sacrifice a romance. I don't know what it's going to be. But I know this from experience and in talking to so many people, that when you decide, when I see danger, I'm going to act. When I see danger, I'm going to act. It almost always requires a sacrifice, and that's why we don't do it. That's why we get in our cars and go home to our same lifestyles, our same habits, our same relationships, and say, you know what, he's probably right. But that would be so complicated. I mean, how am I going to explain to him, or how am I going to explain to her, okay, I went to church today and heard this sermon, so I'm going to move out. And I know I said, and I know I promised, and I know but, I heard this sermon. Andy, that's great, but it's just too complicated. I think I'm just going to keep going. The third word is the word embarrassment. This is an embarrassing thing to do, and here's why. Because the people that know you are going to look at what you do, and they're going to base what you are doing and the decision you make based on what they see right now. But you're acting like then is now. You've decided, I'm not going to respond to today. I'm going to be prudent. I'm going to respond to tomorrow. I'm going to respond to day after tomorrow. I'm going to look down the road, and if I see danger, I'm going to act as if what's there is here, and I'm going to act now, which means you're going to make some decisions that your friends will not understand. You're going to make decisions that even the smart people around you will not understand. You're going to have to make decisions you can never explain fully. In fact, in some cases, you won't even be able to talk about it because it's so personal in nature. And they will not understand, and there will be an element of embarrassment. But the fourth word is the word relief. Because the day is coming when you will breathe a sigh of relief. And you may look back to this day as the day that you got off a path that was going to lead to destruction in some area of your life. And a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you'll look back and you'll breathe a sigh of relief. And you'll say, what if I hadn't acted? What if I hadn't made the decision? What if I hadn't ended the relationship? What if I hadn't confronted him? What if we hadn't made that financial decision? You'll breathe a sigh of relief. Action. Sacrifice. There may be some embarrassment. You'll breathe a sigh of relief. Or it's much easier just to keep going and one day suffer harm. In 1995, I had the opportunity to take Sandra, Louie and Shelley Giglio, and David and Cheryl Bell sailing. I say took. I didn't take them. They actually invited me on the trip. I said that wrong. We all six went sailing, and David Bell, who's been involved, he and Cheryl have been involved with what we do here from the very beginning. Great couple. They found this boat, and we rented or whatever you do, this boat, and they had a skipper and a cook, and we were down around St. Thomas, and we were sailing. And I'm not a big sailor, but it's fun to think you are, because if somebody else does it, you get to stand there and steer the boat like, I sail, until there's a problem, and you say, quick, come. So anyway, we spent about 4 or 5 days sailing, just great time, beautiful weather, everything's great. The last day that we were there, and we were going to leave the next day, so the last night we were sailing, our skipper motored us around into this big, beautiful cove. And there were no houses, no buildings anywhere. It was a separate island. And this whole side of the island, I don't know how to describe this, the mangroves had grown right down into the water, and they had these giant roots that look like spiders' legs that kind of come out and then go down into the water. So you can back even a pretty deep boat all the way up to the shore, and then the mangroves go, 20 feet or so down to the ground. So he backs the boat up within 15 feet, essentially, of the shore. And then he tied 4 lines off the back of our boat onto these mangrove roots, okay? Now, typically when you spend the night out sailing in a cove, you anchor in the middle of the cove. You put out one bow line, and then the wind kind of swings you around, and that's how you spend the night. That's what we had done every other night. But on this particular night, he backs us up, ties 4 lines off the back of the boat. The water was so glassy. There were people water skiing in this cove. It was absolutely beautiful. In fact, we were swimming while he's doing all this work. Then the skipper put on his scuba gear, not just a snorkel, scuba gear, dropped this gigantic anchor overboard, went down and physically swam it out a couple of 100 feet and manually set this anchor with a chain and rope. Then he came back and did the second thing with a smaller second anchor. Then he took several 100 feet of rope, tied it to the bow of the boat, and then with his little dinghy took it all the way across the cove, tied it off this way, all the way across the cove, and tied it off that way. So if you had come into the cove, here is this big sailboat sitting in glassy water with 8 lines out, and you would have thought, that person knows nothing about sailing. They went to a whole lot of trouble for nothing. But fortunately, he'd been listening to the weather report because a hurricane was coming, and we didn't have time to get out. And we rode out the hurricane in the sailboat, tied up in the cove. David Bell and I sat up in the cockpit of the boat and watched a little digital thing that read how hard the wind was blowing, and at one point it froze at 126 miles an hour. And I said to the skipper, why did it freeze there? He said, because it probably blew the wind reader right off the top of the mast. And sure enough, the next morning, it was gone. The winds peaked at 140 miles an hour. It was a national disaster. It tore down the hospital in St. Thomas. It tore down the fire station. The Coast Guard, the United States Coast Guard, had just sold a boat to the Coast Guard at St. Thomas. It sank the boat within 2 hours of the hurricane. It was out to help stranded people. It got stranded and beat to death on the coral. It sank. We were there 2 extra nights. We couldn't get out because the airport was closed, the hotels were closed. And you know what? I was never afraid. In fact, it was actually very exciting. Louis actually went down to his cabin and went to sleep in the middle of the storm, like Jesus. While the disciples were worried, you know, he finally just went to sleep. And these big gusts of wind would come and heave that big old 60-foot boat over, and then it would come back down and heave it over. We were up there with a big searchlight because later in the afternoon, some other boats had come and they'd anchored their sailboats in the same cove. And we watched as one broke loose from his moorings, drifted over and locked the front ends of the boat together and basically just beat holes in both of the boats, and one of them sank right there in the same cove we were in. About 2 or 3 hours after the sun came up, the water was slowly beginning to get to where we could actually move around in our cove in the dinghy. And we went around to the edge of the cove and to the cove next to us. And here's a couple pictures that we snapped. This is pre-digital photography. This is at the point of the cove. There was a guy in this boat who actually, you can't see it, but on the left side, the part that's up, there is a hole so big in this boat, you could actually walk into the hull of this boat. He escaped and got up on the shore. The cove next to us, there were several sailboats sunk. Here's just a picture of an entire sailboat. You can see where it was tied off to the shore and just sank. There were masts, 3 or 4 feet of masts everywhere in that next cove over where the sailboats had just sunk, had just been beat up against the shore, came together, and they sank. I never even felt afraid. It was kind of exciting to us. You know why? Because our skipper saw trouble coming. And he didn't go, we probably ought to. Listen to me. And neither did he take his cue from all those other boat owners. We were the only sailboat that sailed out of either of those 2 coves. So 19 years ago, Sandra and I began to pray this prayer. Heavenly Father, help us to see trouble coming long before it gets here. And give us the wisdom to know what to do. And then give us the courage to do it. Heavenly Father, please help us to see trouble coming long before it gets here. And then please give us the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to do it. And 3 major occasions in our life, 3 major occasions, God answered this prayer. The first one, we didn't even have kids yet. Sandra came to me one day. She said, Andy, you know how we always pray, God, help us to see trouble coming? I said, yes. She said, I think I see trouble coming. And it's right there. And I said, you know what? I've been thinking the same thing. And we made a decision that we could not talk about to anybody, didn't make sense to anybody, and we hurt some people's feelings. It was the right decision. The 2 other decisions were even more major. One cost us a lot of money. One was just, it was just the details just extend out into the lives of a lot of different people. I can't tell you how many times, in some cases, we've sat right here and looked at each other and breathed a sigh of relief, thinking, what if we hadn't acted? That's no guarantee that we'll get it right in the future. But I tell you what, I pray that prayer every day. I pray it for our marriage. I pray it for our finances. I pray it for our children. I pray it about our children's friends. Heavenly Father, I'm not smart enough to know. Heavenly Father, I haven't lived long enough to know. Heavenly Father, I'm on paths I've never been before. How do I know? But I don't want to waste my life. I don't want to waste a year. I don't want to waste a day. I don't want to backtrack. I don't ever want to get to a place, neither do you, to where all the options are bad because I stayed on a path too long, because I said, yeah, I ought to, and yeah, you're right, and probably, and one day, someday. I don't want to do that. I want to get to the end of my life like you do and breathe a sigh of relief. Not because I did the popular thing, but because when I saw trouble coming, I took refuge. Heavenly Father, give us the wisdom. Help us to see trouble coming a long ways off. Give us the wisdom to know what to do, and then the courage to do it. So while I've been talking, let me ask you, are you on some paths you need to get off of? And your temptation will be to go, yeah, you're right, and elbow, and I know, yeah, and high five, and ooh, and get the CD, and just keep going. And if you never miss church between now and the next 3 or 4 years, but you keep going, you will suffer harm. And there may be a day you would do anything to come back to this day and say, I wish I had acted on what I knew to do. Don't waste another minute on a path that leads you somewhere you don't want to go. Whether it's relationally, financially, in the realm of entertainment, in your relationship with alcohol, in your relationship with other substances, in your relationship with a business, an academic pursuit, whatever it might be. Don't waste another moment. Because your Heavenly Father, who loves you, has put enough warnings in the middle of that road to say danger is coming. Now it's up to you to do something about it. The prudent see danger and take refuge. The simple, the naive. The book of Proverbs uses the word stupid. Keep going and suffer for it.